So next what we're going to do is let's build a queue. And a queue is we do the one timeline, but we export it as many different file formats simultaneously. And really what I'm going to do with this is just make two different levels of compression and different frame sizes. So if I go into my master timeline, got my work area bar set as my full composition. If I do Command Control M, that'll send it to the render queue again. And this time under this with my output module, I'm going to go to Format Options and I'm going to click H.264, and then this will allow me to set the data rate. I'm going to leave this at 1920 by 1080, so I want this to probably be around 15,000 kilobits per second. Click OK, click OK, and I'm going to go to my name now, and I'm going to call this Blips and Lines, just to tell me what it is, H.264 1700 1080p. Oh no, 1080. Wait, yeah, 1080. So that's just so I can show all of you what the difference is. Okay, so I've got one in here. If I click the plus next to this output 2, I can then add a second one to that same render queue. So if I go click on the output module again, and I go to maybe a different codec or even the same codec, click on that, and then I limit this one to limit this one to 1000, just like it was. Click OK, but at 1000 kilobits per second, an H.264 may start to look more compressed. Maybe not with this video because there's so much solid color, it probably wouldn't compress too much. But let's go ahead and resize it. So I'm going to click this resize filter in the output module settings and resize this to 960 by 540. Leave the audio the same. Click OK. And I'm going to call this one Blips and Lines 960 by 540 1000 kilobits per second. Okay, so now I'm going to produce 2 video files from this one queue. And you could, if I wanted to create an individual animation of the circle wipe and the lines blip and the line wipe and the star blip as their own little video files, then with them all selected over here in the project panel, if I hit Command Control M, it'll add all of those to the render queue also. So if I hit render now, it'll render them out as an H.264 file. What I typically like to do is export a ProRes. I like to export a ProRes file and then use Media Encoder to encode my more compressed versions, because I'm always going to want to keep a master. But that's just the way I am. All right, so we have, let's take a look at this 17, it should be 17,000. That looks pretty indistinguishable from this one. This one's the master. Okay. So with that simple of an animation, there's no visible difference on playback between the two. If you then had to re-import that into another video that you were compositing and doing additional color correction, the H.264 would start to break up and wouldn't hold up as well as the ProRes because there's just not as many bits put into it. Okay, so let's take a look at the 1000 kilobit per second. Frame size is smaller, but it's still, oh, there's some compression there. Can you see it? You can see it right here. This is getting clunky. Okay. That solid is really nice, except for when it starts getting in here during this transition segment. We're starting to see that break up along that edge. Okay, so that's compression.
So how do you fix that up?
I would up it to 2,000 kilobits a second instead of 1,000 at that frame size and see if it helps it, see if it makes it look any better. Also, that is a QuickTime H.264, not an MP4, so it's a .mov file, but it's got the H.264 codec playing it, which when, for some reason, when kicking out a .mov H.264 file, you need to throw more bits at it in order for it to look just as good as the MP4s made in Media Encoder. That's just a rule that I came up with out of just having exported lots of videos. All right, so let's do this in Media Encoder. Same process, only remember how when I hit Q, it tied up After Effects and it was showing you the update right here in After Effects? Well, After Effects would have stopped responding to me while it was rendering. It would have just gone boom, boom, boom as I was starting to click around. So if I hit Command Option or Alt M, then it will take that sequence, make an additional, like save it as its own After Effects project that it puts in its own special place, and then it'll load that into Media Encoder. So whatever your settings were at this point, yeah, it's launching. So whatever your settings are right here, right now, if you send it to Media Encoder, that's what's going to compress. And that'll allow you to continue to work on your animation and make tweaks to it. So there's Media Encoder. Let's see if this is taking a little while to load up. So if you remember Media Encoder from the Premiere class, all the same principles apply. It's going to take each frame of your animation and it's going to assign however many bits you told it to do based on your bit rate. Nice thing about Media Encoder is this match source high bit rate is a pretty safe default if you're uploading to YouTube. Okay? Because that's going to be a 10,000 kilobit per second H.264 MP4 file. And for YouTube and Vimeo compression, that's about where they like to have theirs for 1080 video. Okay, so it's going to look pretty good. Because it's going to look good, I am going to do the save as, put this in the downloads, and do blips and lines H.264, and I'm going to do ME for Media Encoder. Click Save. Now, just like before, we can go in here, and with this highlighted, we can add, oh, wrong one. We can add a different version to the queue. So if I click on this setting, hopefully this next dialog box will look familiar to you, where you can change the format. So maybe this time I'll do a QuickTime from Media Encoder, see if it looks any different. Then do my codec as LT, and I can match the source, or I could change it. Maybe I'll change this one to a 1280, just so I can have different sizes. That should have been 720. Weird. Okay. And just just because I like to try and make it look as good as possible, I always turn on render at maximum depth and use maximum quality. And technically you could just turn off audio rendering for this and do a video only, and the way you would do that is up here on the you would just deselect export audio, but I'm going to leave it on for now. Click OK there, and I'm going to save this in the same folder as the rest of them, only I'm going to make this H.264.720. Click Save. Now if I hit play, that'll start to render those out, but I can go over to After Effects and continue to work. So I'll Command Tab back over to Media Encoder, watch these go. And wait for it. All right, awesome. So let's go over to Finder and take a look at these. So here's the 720. That's looking pretty crisp. Yeah, that looked really crisp. And here's the H.264 media encoder. This is the MP4 at 10,000 kilobits per second. So that's stayed pretty crisp too. Anyway, any questions about exporting or compressioning? Exporting or compressing? Okay, last thing we need to talk about with the render queue in After Effects. Let's add this to the render queue again. So Command Control M, and I am getting really tired of having to click on this lossless word, going in, changing the codec to ProRes LT, making sure that the audio is 48 kilohertz per second. So what I can do here is I can make a template and name it ProRes LT 48, and that would be my preset for the one that I use most of the time. So if I go to Make Template, it's all the way down at the bottom of that menu. Then I can call this one ProRes LT 48K. Then I can go into my settings, and here you have to edit. You have to say Edit, go to my Format options, change that to ProRes 422 LT. Just confirm that my audio is 48 kilohertz, 16-bit stereo. Click OK. Then I can go to Movie Default with this dialog open and tell it to be ProRes LT 48K. That way, After Effects knows by default that's the one I use the most. Or if there are others, I can do others and select them from this list. But by default now, whenever I add something to the render queue, let me delete that. Whenever I add something to the render queue, by default, it's going to be ProRes LT 48K. And then all I have to do is make sure it's being saved in the right place and the right name, and then hit render, and I'm good to go. Okay. Same thing can be done for your render settings. This is the last thing that if this starts to get too technical for you, chances are really good that unless you're going to be working in broadcast, you're not going to have to worry about it. But I do want to say that if you click on the render settings, you can do a draft or a wireframe, and you can do a resolution change. So if you want to do half resolution at like a wireframe quality, it'll render it out faster. The only time you would ever use this is if you just want to quickly check your animation. Okay, it'll render it out really quick. It's not going to be very good quality, but you can at least see to make sure that it's moving the way you want it to, and the timing is good and all that stuff. So I'm gonna leave that at best and full. Then this is also the place where you can say length of comp instead of your work area bar. Because by default, it's going to export your work area whether your work area is set at the length of the comp or not. Okay, so if you have your work area set at like a couple seconds of your timeline, but you want to see the whole composition get rendered, this is where you would change it to length of comp. The other thing is this field order. This is if I had a 23.98 footage, or you know, that I was rendering out of After Effects, but I needed to convert it to 2997 for broadcast. I would add, for HD, it would have to be upper level first, and then I would add a 3.2 pull down, and that would, it does this magical mathematical thing where it turns 24 frames a second into 30. It's magic without having to skip frames. It makes your, that's all I can say. The software just does this magical thing where it's ready for broadcast. That's as technical as I want to get with it. All right. So I'm going to just click OK there and delete this. And unless anybody's got any questions, that is how you get your video. That's how you get your animations out of After Effects into a completed video. So, question in the back?
Can you change the comp, like if you've already rendered a comp and then you're using that same comp in something else later, can you change the settings in it? Or is it just stuck to the rendered comp? So I was trying to do something the other day except it was already done and I didn't know, like, you know, when it was going through and it didn't have an option to change the settings, so I didn't know if there's a way to do it.
Let me answer what I think your question is. So you've got a composition that you've rendered out already,
Yeah.
and you want to use that in another one.
Yeah.
Okay? So if I wanted to, I could import any of these that I just exported. Let's pretend I import this 960 by 541 because it's a smaller size, right? If I bring that into this composition, it's smaller. The only way to make that the full size of the composition would be to scale it up, which pixelates it. So if I've already rendered it out, I can always make it smaller, but I can't make it bigger without losing quality. So you'd have to go back and re-render it at a higher resolution in order to get more resolution out of it. It's like a JPEG image. You know, once you've scaled it down and saved it, that's the new resolution of it. Yeah, so it's, yeah. Unfortunately, the answer is you can't make it better. You can always make it worse. That's why I always save out my master at a higher bitrate codec at the full resolution. That way, if somebody needs me to email it to them, I can always make it smaller and then email it. If I need to upload it to Vimeo or YouTube, I can always compress it to a more practical size for uploading and then upload it to Vimeo or YouTube. That's why I always make my master file first. Besides, some of the options for the compression in Adobe Media Encoder produce higher quality results than the ones straight out of After Effects. Unless you're doing that pull down removal that I just showed you at the end, then After Effects does that really well. So, any other questions? All right, cool. Good lesson. I hope I was recording that whole time.